Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first 101 workshop of 2023. Um, we are going to be changing up our 101 workshops, even though you can't tell right now in January, right? We decided to start again with the Green Party 101. But this year, this coming year, we're not going to be doing the consistent quarterly rotation that we had been doing. In 2022, we went Green Party 101, Eco-Socialism 101, Organizing 101, and then we repeated it quarterly. They each got updates. We came at it from kind of different perspectives, like organizing. Our third session was on how to build a local from scratch, and our fourth session was on how to revitalize a local that's stagnated. So we're moving away from that a little. But we are starting off 2023 again with a Green Party 101. The rest of the year, you probably will see another Green Party. You probably will see an organizing. You probably will see an eco-socialism. But instead of just repeating them every 3 months, we're going to do a little bit more variety. You may see for example, one of the things we've talked about is doing, one workshop each on the Green Party's 4 pillars, right? So instead of trying to fit tonight, we're going to talk about green politics. We're going to talk about green history. We're going to talk about the Green Party structure and Green Party organizing strategy, right? So we're going to condense a lot of things into, this one workshop. So our hope is, thinking about something like the 10 or the 4 pillars, each getting their own, is that we can really dive deeper into, that policy section or something like that. We've talked about doing a workshop on independent politics because it's a really important, topic and conversation for us to have as Greens and independent socialists. We've talked about, maybe doing one on conflict resolution, maybe doing one on how to run a meeting, right? Getting into a little more of those organizing side of things. So we have some changes coming to the 101 program. We're still kind of tinkering with our schedule for the year, but here we are, first week or first month with our Green Party 101. The theme for this, I said with the organizing session 3 and 4, we talked about how to build a local and how to revitalize a local. The theme for this month's Green Party 101 is can Chris and Garrett shut up and do this in an hour? Right, that's that 2020 year for the first 2022, the first year of our 101 series. We really did make an explicit commitment to ourselves that we weren't going to try to pigeonhole everything into an hour. That kind of blew up, and we were, closer to 3, which is way longer than we needed to be. So we wanted to come back with a Green Party 101 in a more condensed version, with a little less commentary for us. So with that, if you want to learn more about the series, you can go to greensocialist.net/101s with an S. We have all of our sessions from last year up there, so you can watch them. You can listen to them as a podcast. You can look at the slideshow, things like that. So you can learn more there, but we will get rolling. To start it off, I'm Chris Blankenhorn. I'm the Illinois Green Party Secretary. I'm a former Green Party of the United States co-chair from 2016 to 2018. And I'm one of the organizers with the Green Socialist Organizing Project's Education Working Group. Joining me as always with the 101s is Garrett Wasserman. Garrett is a current Green Party of the United States co-chair, and has held a number of roles in Pennsylvania, where he's located. So without any further ado, we will get started. Green Party 101, an introduction to green politics and the global green movement. An outline real quick. We're going to divide, like I said, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but we're going to divide this presentation into 4 main parts. What does it mean to be green? Looking at green values, programs, policies. Where did the Greens come from? A brief history of the Green Party. How do Greens intend to win? Green political organizing and strategy. And then how do I get involved? Looking, at the structure of the party itself and how to actually get involved, in your local, state, or the national party. So to start off, what is the green vision? What policies do Greens support? The Green Party is guided by kind of two interconnected foundations. The short one is the four pillars. The four pillars of the Green Party are peace, social justice, ecology, and grassroots democracy. And you can see those things play out, in our issue-specific policies, and you can see a lot of intersectionality between them. After the four pillars, kind of expanding a little, but maintaining that broadness, we also have the 10 key values that guide our vision. Those are peace, social justice, ecology, sustainable economics, democracy, decentralization, feminism and gender equality, respect for diversity, personal and global responsibility, and future focus and sustainability. And much in the same way as the four pillars are very intersectional, there's a huge amount of overlap in the 10 key values as well. Those are kind of the broad underlying values, that make up what do Greens believe. And, in many ways, those values guide us in our, discussions and, policy decisions as we, kind of take those more abstract ideas and bring them into concrete policy. So the important thing to understand there, right, is that the Green Party is an eco-socialist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist political party and activist organization. We'll get into some, different pieces of this throughout, but it's important to understand what the Green Party is. And when you look at, I'll go back, but when you look at these, right, peace, social justice, ecology, sustainable economics, democracy, decentralization, feminism and gender equality, respect for diversity, personal and global responsibility, future focus and sustainability. Capitalism can't abide by a single one of those, right? Capitalism is not peaceful. The demand for new markets it fuels new conflict and war, whether that be outright physical war or economic warfare, which we are living in the United States, we perpetuate a lot of. Similarly, like social justice, capitalism is not a framework that uplifts social justice, and then at the end of that, the idea of social justice is empowerment and liberation. Those are things that are not, they're fundamentally opposed to capitalists, to capitalism and the way that the system works. Capitalism is destroying the planet, so it's clearly not ecological. We have a massive economic inequality both domestically in the United States and through the world. So it's clearly not sustainable economically unless you're in that very small top percent. Democracy, capitalism is a hierarchical system. It is an anti-democratic system. It places power in the hands of the few and takes it away from workers and citizens. Certainly not decentralized. It's a hierarchical by definition. Much in the same way that it can't abide by social justice, feminism, and gender equality, are kind of antithetical to capitalist ideals. That doesn't mean that they aren't abused and through things like tokenism. But when you come down to it, capitalism is not about empowerment and liberation. So it's not about feminism and equality. Respect for diversity, again, I just said tokenism, but that's about as far as capitalism respects diversity. Capitalism tends to use diversity as a weapon to divide. Personal and global responsibility, there's very little responsible about capitalism, and same for future focus, right? We're not going to have a future if we continue under this capitalist system. So by definition, our values, even though it doesn't come out and those 10 key values don't say the 10 socialist values of the Green Party, when you look at them, it's clear that every single one of those values is an eco-socialist, is an anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist value. So we'll get to that. And then the Green Party is a political party, obviously, right? We're the Green Party, but we're also an activist organization. And we'll get into that kind of later when we talk about strategy. So we could talk for hours, right, about Green Party policies. And we explicitly said that's not what we're trying to do tonight. So to be quick, right, a big, our kind of key foundational, policy pieces. The Green New Deal, it was born here. In the United States, the first Green New Deal, it was, articulated in 2010. Howie Hawkins in New York really ran with it with his gubernatorial campaign that year, and is often recognized, as one of the originators of it. But there were, I want to say, over 100 Green candidates running with the slogan of a Green New Deal in 2010. So we were talking about this idea a decade before AOC co-opted it and brought it into the Democratic Party, right? And so what the Howie Hawkins 2020 presidential campaign did was really bring an update to it, right? Was really bring it into the realm of eco-socialism. It called out 4 main areas of policy change: economic human rights, a green economic transition, financial reform, and elections reform. The Economic Bill of Rights included right to housing, healthcare, a good job, a secure retirement, lifetime education, things like that. And then the Green Economy Reconstruction Program, got into how do we actually make a transition to 100% green energy by 2030, not 2050, which, is the number that the UN and, the leftmost politicians that the Democrats offer will talk about. 2030 is the date that science says. And in 2020, with Howie Hawkins' eco-socialist Green New Deal policy, we actually showed that it's possible, right? We put out a balanced budget that would implement the programs that were needed to overhaul not only our energy production system, but agriculture, transportation, housing, everything. It was ambitious. It was twice as much as what Bernie proposed. It was, about 10 times as much as the Thrive agenda. And what we ended up getting in Build Back Badly is nothing. Build Back Badly was primarily gifts to corporations to do better. So more corporate welfare and tax breaks for middle-class folks who can already drop, $50,000 to $100,000 on an electric car. So that was most, and alongside those, unserious solutions, we also opened up, 600 million square miles of public lands to oil and gas exploration. So, even when we were kind of given that little nod in those, really milquetoast, climate proposals, we slid in, continuing fossil fuel infrastructure, which, if we want to have any hope of, averting climate catastrophe, we have to stop now. No new climate infrastructure, no new fossil fuel infrastructure, because the second we build a pipeline, it's online for 40 years, and we can't handle that. The climate can't handle that. So, some highlights of kind of how that broad idea comes out, and these are kind of sorted by the 4 pillars. So, under social justice, some concrete policies that under our social justice plan: ending the war on drugs, anti-discrimination laws, defending reproductive rights, passing the Equality Act, the Equal Rights Amendment, the Economic Bill of Rights, reparations, honor treaty rights with indigenous communities, close detention camps, and open the borders. So all of those kind of fall under our social justice. Under ecology, we had, like I said, the eco-socialist Green New Deal, which would bring about 100% clean energy by 2030. We would ban fracking, divest from fossil fuels, get green manufacturing in place, zero waste recycling, regenerative agriculture, revitalize the Civilian Conservation Corps, right? Because we're going to need to be planting trees. We're going to need to be changing, revitalizing an environment that we've destroyed. And things like the CCC, revitalizing the CCC helps us provide jobs, right? Federal jobs, just like they did during the Great Depression and the New Deal era, as well as greening public transportation, and Howie's budget had an Office of Climate Mobilization, because one of the first things that Howie said if he was elected president, what he was going to do was declare a climate emergency. And then he would create that office to, oversee the transition in a very quick amount of time, right? It'd be nice if we could say that we could slow roll this, But we spent decades doing nothing, in fact, making the climate situation worse. So we're kind of at a point where we can't slowly transition anymore, right? The no turning back is less than 8 years away. So we really need to get moving. Under democracy, right? The U.S. likes to, likes to posit itself and position itself as the democratic leader of the world, but in reality, we aren't a democracy, and we never have been. We weren't by design, right? We are a government and a country that was created by and for oligarchs, right? So the fact that we have an oligarchy today shouldn't be a shock. It was by design, right? That was who was in the room. That was who was making the rules when we wrote our Constitution. So our democracy reforms include ranked choice voting, abolishing the Electoral College, proportional representation, which we achieved through multi-member districts, which isn't a crazy idea. Here in Illinois, we used to have it. The Democrats got rid of it. In Maryland, they have multi-member districts for their lower house. So in that situation, multiple people are elected the same seat. It's not an winner take all, right? It's not someone wins 51% and 49% of you are out of luck, right? That 49% gets a seat. And it also opens up the space where third parties and independents can actually have a footing, can actually start to gain a footing. Fair ballot access. We have the worst ballot access laws in the world, right? When you start looking at some of our worst, and it's an intentionally complex system that is done that way specifically because it makes it hard for anyone but a massive corporate party to navigate it. There's 50 plus, 51 with DC plus, Guam and all of the other territories. They all have their own electoral systems that you have to navigate. They all have their own requirements to get on the ballot, right? Where Garrett lives in Pennsylvania, it takes 5,000 to get a governor or a president on the ballot. Where I live in Illinois, it takes 25,000. Where Howie lives in New York, it takes 45,000, right? And Howie's number in New York is in 42 days, and that was a law that was passed during COVID, right? They hid it in a COVID bill to make it harder for Greens to challenge them and harder for Libertarians to challenge them. In Illinois, it's 90 days. In Pennsylvania, you guys are lucky and you get a lot longer, right? Auditable paper balloting, full public campaign financing, ending corporate personhood, DC statehood, and sovereignty for the territories. They get Puerto Rico, Guam. They get to decide: do they want to be a state? Do they want to be an independent nation? Do they want to maintain their current, territory status? Which I don't think many would choose if they, understood the people of Puerto Rico don't get to vote for president. They have a vote, but it doesn't count. They don't get a vote in Congress, right? They get to send someone, but they don't get to vote. And so letting them internally determine, what they want to be in the future. And then peace, 75% military budget cut, closing overseas bases, just transition for the soldiers, new nuclear treaties paired with nuclear disarmament, a no first use policy for our nukes, end all of our coups and meddling that we do around the world, lift sanctions, support BDS, and then a global Green New Deal, right? As a world leader, economically, and a world leader in the destruction that's been done to the environment, we owe it to the rest of the world to help them achieve, climate goals if we're going to get there. It can't all be, left to each country. So we have a responsibility more than most, in my opinion, to, actually get into that stuff, and to provide help and aid and become, how I used to say, become a humanitarian superpower, right? So we're going to skip questions till the end, just because we're trying to move through. I'm going to let Garrett take over on the history side, and yeah.
Yeah, hi everyone. So Garrett here, current steering committee co-chair for Green Party, and I'm here to tell you about a little bit of the history of the Green Party real fast. So I just realized I don't have the button to advance the slide, so you're going to have to do that, Chris. Sorry. So the Green Party's history is somewhat complex. So to kind of simplify it, after World War II, folks came home from the war, and there was the whole big boom as being the one of the world's superpowers, powered by effects of the New Deal and things like that, right? And you started to see more domestic movements for change, for civil rights, for environmentalism, for feminism, and for peace. That as the Cold War started to take over, right, there were movements for peace against all the wars. And so, this of course came out in the 1960s, in particular, when all of these movements, really became big nationwide movements, and you saw marches on Washington, and activists, sitting in and taking over nuclear sites to prevent nuclear things, and anti-war marches and all kinds of stuff. And all of these movements had a fairly large impact and influence on the government at the time, and they actually won a lot of these battles. We got some civil rights legislation passed. The Vietnam War wound down. Nuclear plants weren't allowed to expand beyond a certain point. And so, there were some victories, and this was all good. But the problem was, when all these victories occurred, part of the victories were assumed that you could push for more things within the Democratic Party. So all of these movements became co-opted. They became pulled into the Democratic Party and kind of synthesized in with the Democratic Party as it existed. So once that happened, the change stopped. You didn't see any of these movements pushing for things anymore, because they all were stuck within the machinery of the Democratic Party, which is what it's designed to do. It's designed to co-opt movements and prevent the U.S. from moving more toward the left, more towards socialist policies. So after seeing the effects of this, after the 60s and 70s, folks started to come together in the 80s and say, clearly we need more independent movements again in order to build popular power and popular struggle, in order to start winning on these issues again. Because the Democratic Party is slowing us down. We have to do it outside of the Democratic Party. We have to build popular struggle. And so that was really where you saw the birth of the discussion of the Green Party, where veterans from the civil rights movement and the feminist movement and environmental movement and peace movement came together and started talking about how can we build an independent party for change, to build our own power. And those organizations started to hold meetings where those different organizations, would send representatives, and they would talk about, what would a hypothetical Green Party look like? And so they started to do this in the early 1980s. And if you fast forward a little bit, it eventually coalesced into the first Green Party in the early 1990s, which was formed as what would you call, like a leftist green, maybe today we would call it a socialist green sort of program that was focused on education and organizing primarily. Educating the general public about green socialist stances, and then organizing in our local communities, yes, to run candidates, but also to grow that activist movement again that we saw in like the 1960s, for example, so that we can have more, build up for bigger system-wide change. And, that idea caught on with a lot of interest. Folks came into the Green Party, built up Green Parties within their local communities and their states through the 90s. And that led up to the idea of like, well, what if the Green Party puts forward somebody to run for president? And so the idea was to throw Ralph Nader out to run for president, and he did in 1996 and then again in 2000. And Ralph Nader got so much attention, and people probably kind of forget, and especially if you're youth, you may not have even seen this, but you can find it on YouTube. The videos of Ralph Nader's runs for president. He was like Bernie Sanders. He was pulling in like huge crowds that were filling stadiums and things like that. So this was, a really interesting moment that really built up and solidified today's Green Party. So from, those activist roots, from those organizing roots, and then the Nader campaign bringing in more activists and campaigners and candidates and stuff, we saw the Green Party of the United States officially formed around the year 2000 as a national party. So that's, I think, kind of the lead up to where we're at today. So next slide, please. Yeah. So just as a reminder, because of these different roots, the Green Party is both an activist organization and an electoral party. We run people for office, but we also organize our communities for activism, for advocacy. and directly make demands and change within our communities. So we use multiple strategies that we'll get to in order to build up a green socialist world. So next slide. Yeah. So since 2000, since that the official, the National Green Party of the United States was finally formed. Before that, it was kind of collections of states and locals and all that were not quite formed into this full national thing that we have today. Since then, the Green Party has done a combination of activist work and running campaigns at every level of office every year. And so that's often a complaint, right? That, I only see the Greens every 4 years or whatever. That comes from Democrats that are trying to, wave away what Greens have actually done. And the truth is that the Greens run in every level of office every year. But of course, the United States is a very big country. So unfortunately, we don't have a Green that runs in every single city. But of course, that's something that we would like to build up to.
There's something like 500,000 elected offices in the United States.
Yeah.
To put it in context of what
right.
you run for everything. And even the Republicans and Democrats don't run for everything.
Yeah. There's a lot of offices that go unopposed. There's a lot of offices that literally no one runs for, and somebody has to get appointed to later, or it goes unfilled. So, in any case, the Green Party tries to run folks every level of office every year. And so some quick stats are, since the party was formed, there's been over 1,300 elected officials that have actually been in office. Most of those are local, although a few of them did win state offices too, although I don't think there's any currently in state office. But they've won, city council races and mayor races and city water protection, and all kinds of local offices where they've done a lot of good for their communities and have built up the movement. So it's very true that Greens actually do win very often in local elections. It's important to remember that. We need more people running for office. It's not that Greens can't win, it's just that we need more. We need more people running and, of course, more support for those candidates. So, as we grow our local parties, we'll get there. And part of that growth, of course, is running national campaigns. So we've had presidential campaigns every year that try to help get the word out about what the Green Party is, what our values are, what our policy is, to a national audience. And then, as people learn about things like the Green New Deal and they get excited about it, they can join their state or local party and help it grow. So to just kind of emphasize again local actions that, Greens have run for office, and as we mentioned, thousands have actually been elected over time to local offices. But campaigns are not the only thing that Greens do. That a lot of Greens get involved in local activism of various ways, and so sometimes when Greens are in office, like Jason West or Gail McLaughlin, they can do good things in their community from their local offices, such as officiating same-sex marriages before that was a thing. When even Democrats were opposed to that, Greens were leading on the issue and making it happen. A Green mayor helped prevent evictions during the last big housing crisis, and maybe we're coming up on another one. As it would be important to have more Greens in that sort of position. But then also Greens were activists, like the Reverend Edward Pinckey, who opposed corruption in his hometown from the corporation that kind of ran the show, right? Sherry Honkler, who ended up being one of our Green vice presidential candidates, is very active activist against homelessness in Philadelphia and founded the Poor People's Human Economic Rights campaign that continues to do good work about finding housing for people today. And then Jill Stein, I'd like to point this one out too, that after her presidential campaign, used the courts to force Pennsylvania to adopt auditable paper ballots for the first time, which was something we never had before in Pennsylvania. We used electronic machines that had no paper trail. So it was really bad. But a Green Party lawsuit against the Democratic governor who's opposing it is what finally forced the state to use auditable paper ballots just in time for the Donald Trump election, where he was trying to challenge elections. So, it made a big difference there. So Greens, we use campaigns, we use activism, we use the courts even to get change in our communities. So it's good to be aware of some of these. There's a small sampling of things that Greens have done, right? But Greens are active in their communities, and of course, the more we grow, the more that we can do. So I'll hand it over to Chris now to talk about when we get together, how do we organize?
Yeah, if you've watched previous ones, you would. This is different, right? Garrett and I are trading back and forth, and apart from me interrupting a couple times, we're not, riffing and things like that. Just to remind people, like if they want to hear more about some of this stuff, right? This is the condensed version. You can go to greensocialist.net/101s and you can watch a 3-hour version of this, right? Where we get in and we talk more deeply about how cool it was and how absolutely revolutionary it was. That Claire McLaughlin actually used eminent domain to seize, foreclosed houses from banks and give them back to people. Like that's crazy, right? So if you want to hear more about that, you can watch our past ones. But for now, what's the Green Party strategy? How do we, move beyond where we are now, right, as a minor party? And this debate's been going on for a long time, right, since the beginning. One of the things I think is coolest about, the founding of the Green Party in the United States and, our first official meeting in Minnesota in 1984, I think, in 1984, is that it wasn't that like just people from all these different states came. People came as delegates of movements, right? Howie Hawkins is often, referred to as one of, and it's true, he's one of the founders of the Green Party in the United States. But at that first meeting, he was there as a representative of the Clamshell Alliance, which is an anti-nuclear organization that he founded in the Northeast. That is heavily responsible for, kind of ending the expansion of nuclear power plants in the U.S., right? So people came and they were a representative of this feminist movement or this environment, Earth First, or this environmental activist organization, right? Or this, workers organization or labor union, independent labor union, things like that. So the Green Party is from its founding a coalition of activists that have, in varying levels of success, come together to form a cohesive Green Party, right? So there's been a lot of debate in that, right? There's a lot of different perspectives and different ways that people got to where they are to being green, but there's a few things we tend to agree on. We should organize in our communities around local issues and support local unions. We should create new independent community institutions for mutual aid and grassroots democracy. We should support community goals with the municipal electoral campaigns, and we should utilize national campaigns to maintain ballot access and increase visibility for the Green platform, right? So if you notice, most of these are locally focused. And Garrett already kind of threw out the attack on Greens that we only run in presidential elections. But when you talk about Green strategy, presidential elections are a relatively small, part of it. We run in presidential elections for a few reasons, and some of them are required, right? There are something like 30 to 4, I think it's close to 40 states require a statewide race like president to get ballot access statewide, right? So if we don't run in these states, we can't get ballot access throughout the state, which makes it harder to run for Congress, for state house, for local office, right? So we run for those reasons, right? To actually make it easier because of the incredibly repressive ballot access laws that exist in much of the country. We run as the presidential campaign because that's when people are paying attention, right? For better or worse, there's more attention at that time. And so we really can't, when the spotlight turns on, really can't shy away from it, right? We need to take the moment to step into it. We need to take that moment to get our policies and our perspectives out into our communities. So we run those big campaigns because we have to. But the reality is, if we're going to grow the Green Party, right? If we're going to grow the Green Party, we have to start local. We have to start by electing people to our local city councils, our local park boards, our local library boards. From there, they can gain experience to the point that they can win mayor, right? Here in Illinois, we just had our first Green mayor elected, and it's a nonpartisan election, right? So he wasn't elected with a G after his name, but he's been a decades-long Green. His father's been a decades-long Green. But he's a professor in Galesburg, Illinois at Knox College, and he served for a decade on the city council, right? Building up that reputation to the point that when he ran, he was able to win his first run for mayor. So running those lower level races gives the credibility, gives the experience, gives the networking and the name recognition that's needed to then win at the higher level of local, right? And then I don't know that Peter's planning on going anywhere. I actually kind of feel like he's not, right? But a Green mayor is really set up to run for state house, is really set up to make a serious run for U.S. Congress. So what we need to be focusing on our strategy is focusing local, right? We're a grassroots party. That means bottom up. We're not an AstroTurf party, which is what you see out of the Democratic Party, where they mobilize people from a top-down direction. It's not really grassroots. It's tricking and exploiting the working class into pushing the messaging and the narrative of the capitalist class. That's what you get out of the astroturfing that you see from the Democratic Party and for the various organizations in the not-for-profit industrial complex that surround them. So for Greens, we really do agree that we have to focus local. It's just a question of how effective are we. And we're not only focused, right, on running people for local elections. If we only show up to run in an election, we don't have the credibility that even in my opinion, lets us deserve to be elected, regardless of what our platform policy says, right? If we want to be elected and be a true representative and a true voice, not even a representative, but a voice for our community, then we have to be active in it. Between elections, 365 days a year, right? We've got to be involved in the struggles of our local community. We've got to be, and our job as kind of socialist green organizers is to make connections for people, to help people when they say, I'm frustrated with this, to make the connections up to those bigger policies, right? Oh, when people talk to me about in my town about our city or about the quality of our streets, I always say, do you know that our city budget, our public works and our police department ask for the same amount of money? Public works got 30% of their request, and the police department got 98.9 or something like that, right? Our roads suck because our leadership in City Hall is prioritizing authoritarian policing policies, right? They're putting half of our city budget into the police, and that means they don't have money to spend on the road, to spend on the schools, to spend on social services, to spend on things that are important to actually building our community, to spend on things that if we actually want to address crime, could address it, because cops do not address crime. They are horrible at solving crime and addressing crime, right? But my Democratic-led city council is, all in on more money for police, and that's why our roads suck, right? And so we can help make these connections, right? When your local people complain, when your local, when your neighbors and your local activists are talking about environmental issues on the local level, you can help connect it up. Oh, that's ComEd. You know who they are, right? Right? That's the massive, utility company that's doing this. That, we've bailed them out billions in Illinois. And you can start making these connections into the bigger picture of, the climate crisis and capitalism. And we've got to do all that, starting at the bottom, because we can't compete with the millions of dollars of PR, right? And the millions of dollars of lobbying that the Democratic Party and the capitalist class have, right? But what we can do, right? You may not be able to go on TV and convince people, that you're right, but in a one-on-one conversation with your neighbor, we can get somewhere, right? And the more of these one-on-one conversations we have, and the more we show skin in our local community, the more that people are going to say, these are people that we can trust. These are people that we can call when we need help. And then when we run for office, they'll say, I know that dude, right? I know that dude. He shows up and he does what, he fights my fights. So we've got to be active in not only running for these local offices, but creating new, mutual aid opportunities, seeing what people need in your community and trying to fill the gap where, the public, frankly, it should be public service, but, public sector filling, but it's not, or it's been offloaded to, top heavy private industry that just wants the money and that aren't actually interested in the service. We need to be creating mutual aid. We need to be creating alternative, ways for people to engage. And we need to be supporting local movements through our campaigns, right? We need to be not coming and speaking for people, but, trying to empower them and trying to uplift the voices that are already involved in these movements. And another key reason why we're so focused on starting local is, like I said earlier, right? We have 51 sets of ballot access laws. We have 51 sets of election laws. We have 51 sets of how things work in our governments. And that makes it really hard. And, another thing I didn't realize until I visited Europe and met with a Green city councilor in Amsterdam was it's incredibly hard to organize continentally, which is what we have to do, right? When I met with Imane in Amsterdam and we were talking, one of the things that really struck me was she could be anywhere in her country within 2 hours on public transit. I can barely get out of my state in the shortest direction in 2 hours, and we're not even going to talk about public transit. Right? Like, I actually could get on a train and maybe get to St. Louis in 2 hours. But that's it. That Amtrak's for at the end of the road in terms of public transit outside of state. So we have this really unique organizing situation where we're trying to continentally organize with different rules everywhere we go, and it's incredibly difficult to have a top-down success there unless, like the Democratic and Republican parties, you've got literally billions of dollars and you don't provide a voice to your membership, right? 94%, I think, of Democrats say that they want Medicare for all. It's not even on the table from their leadership, right? 60-something% of Republicans say they want it. Not on the table from their leadership, right? So the only way you can do that top-down organizing, if it is an elite organizing, if it's an elite, political party, which is what we have. So we have to start local, right? We've got to at least at a minimum start in the states and start organizing with each of those 51 different sets of conditions that we have to get into. And then, people always talk about, oh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm another thing. But the reality is a lot of states don't have partisan registration. Right? In Illinois, we can't register as a party. It's not how it works here. We're called a semi-closed primary. So on primary day, I go to the polls and I say I want a Republican ticket or I want a Democratic ticket. Or if I'm somewhere where the Green Party is recognized, I can walk in and say I want a Green Party ticket. Or you can try to do what I did in the last primary and say I want a nonpartisan ticket, and they told me they didn't have one, and I was actually disenfranchised. I wasn't allowed to vote because I wasn't a Republican and I wasn't a Democrat, and those are the only options they have, right? So in about 20 states, you can't even register as a Green, right? So we kind of have to think about what does it mean to be a member of a party and break away from that memberless party structure of the Republicans and the Democrats where they have voters, but they don't have party members. Right, the members of the party don't have much of this. The rank and file grassroots member of the party don't have much to say. So we're focusing local because that's where we have to, actually build ourselves as Greens, because we can't just check that box. And even when we do care, where we can check that box, it doesn't necessarily mean anything besides, a letter on a piece of paper on our voter registration. So to deal with these unique conditions, we have to, organize locally. we need to do, we have to start bottom up and build that, build our capacity, build our membership, build our trust, build our reputation. And upon that foundation, we can build upward into these higher offices. And I've really, I've kind of laid out, the arguments for the independent party, right? But, just to quote Marx, even when there is no prospect whatsoever of being elected, the workers must put up their own candidates in order to preserve their independence, to count their forces, and to bring before the public their revolutionary attitude and party standpoint. In this connection, they must not allow themselves to be seduced by arguments of the Democrats, as for example, that by doing so they are splitting the Democratic Party and making it possible for reactionaries to win. The ultimate intention of such phrases is to dupe the proletariat to the advance which the proletariat party is bound to make by such independent action is indefinitely more important than a disadvantage it might be incurred by a few reactionaries in the representative body, right? So even going back to Marx, right, and we talked about this in our strategy, a lot of electoral power in the United States, for worse, right? This isn't a for better or worse. This is a for worse situation. There's not really a for better. But for worse, a lot of the power in the United States is sequestered in electoral politics, right? We can get involved in, building parallel institutions. We can get involved in mutual aid and things like that, and we do, and we should. But a lot of the actual power to change things is sequestered into electoral politics. So, kind of by that argument, and Marx is here, making that argument over a century and a half ago, right? We can't just give it up. That doesn't mean we're all in 100% electoral, right? We go back. We're both an activist organization and a electoral party. But we can't just abandon electoralism. If we abandon electoralism, we abandon most power to the capitalist class, right? That if we aren't running and challenging them, then they're the only ones who can win. So we've got to, kind of find this balance, and it's the throughout the history of the party, it's often been, kind of positioned as a either or, where are we an electoral party or are we a movement? And we have to stop that either or. They're not mutually exclusive, and in fact, they're mutually dependent. If we're going to have success as a movement and actually bring about change, we have to have people in power to actually, raise our points to victory and not just co-opt them, which is what we get out of the Democratic Party. And if we, want to succeed in running, we need the support of our community in the movements. So we have to be involved in these two things. And it's a balancing act that, every local is going to have to figure out. Where are you in your current development as a local or state party, right? Do you need to be in the building phase where you might want to focus more on the movement side, or do you have a solid base that might actually be able to win, and you need to get, your focus reoriented towards, running serious candidates. And that's another thing Greens need to really focus on: serious candidates, not just candidates, but serious candidates. The problems that we face, right? The problems of our kind of doomsday capitalism that we're in right now, like, they're so huge that a lot of times Greens just feel the need to do something, and they don't do it effectively. They just have to do it. They have to act. And they don't put the work into building a base. They don't put the work into building a solid strategy. They don't put the work into, targeting where they're, running people. And they just declare they're running for a race, and they put up a mediocre campaign and they lose. And they go on with their day until 2 years later when they feel they have to do something, right? So we've got to make sure we're running quality candidates. This part, this idea of independence is often talked of as a strategy, right? Is the inside out strategy of Bernie and DSA, or is it a, outside strategy that, the Greens and other independent socialists come from, orient around? But I'm very much from the perspective that when we kind of posited as a strategy question, we're actually completely undermining socialism if we're socialists, right? Socialism is independent of capitalism, right? Socialism doesn't, go within capitalism and seek to change it. That's not really, how that works. We can't go into the Democratic Party, which is through and through democratic or through and through capitalist, right? They say it, right? Pelosi and Biden, all their leadership say it. We are a capitalist party, period, full stop, no question marks, right? And so when we can't go within that and actually, implement the changes we want, because that party is ideologically opposed to what we're fighting for. So independence isn't really a strategy to me. It's a pillar of socialist organizing. If we're not independent of capital, are we not just, pawns of capital? So that's something that, like I said, one of the topics we may do as a 101 this year is independent politics and diving deeper into that. So again, the Green Party is both an activist organization and an electoral party, right? And it's a multi-tendency party, right? We have a lot of people with different views. I work closely. I come from more of like a bottom left anarcho-communist. I'm a solid Marxist, but again, then Garrett comes from more of a like Bookchin municipalist background. And then, one of my closest people who brought me into the National Party is a Marxist-Leninist, right? And then we've got progressive, capitalists, because that's what progressives are, right? They're just liberals. It's a new word for liberal. They're New Deal liberals as opposed to neoliberals, is probably the best way to see it. But we've got plenty of New Deal liberals in here as well. But as of 2016, the Green Party is explicitly an anti-capitalist party. And so we've got this wide tendency. And the great part about that wide tendency and the dual, action of activist and electoral is if you're not interested in electoral, you work on the movement side. And if you're not interested in the movement, you work on the electoral side. And you, instead of working in parallel, they're part of the same, strategy. So with that, I went way longer than I wanted to on that little bit. We may not hit an hour, but I'm going to turn it over to Garrett on how the Green Party is organized.
We're close enough.
Yeah, we're
doing good enough time.
I'm fine with an hour 10.
So this last 10 minutes or so are going to be on the structure of the Green Party and kind of the beginning on how you can get involved and understand where you kind of fit into the larger Green Party. So we talked about our key values earlier, and our key values include grassroots democracy, which is very participatory. Folks have to be able to participate in it and in all the steps of it, really. And we also emphasize decentralization, which maybe another term would be like kind of a semi-autonomous sort of thing. That we encourage communities to adapt to the unique conditions that they're facing in their locals, in their regions, in their states. So we don't want to prescribe too much top-down sort of stuff, right? We want to encourage our local and state parties to do what makes sense in that region. So because of that, our national Green Party structure is as a federation of state parties. So it's not meant to be this top-down structure where a national committee or whatever makes decisions and then tells all the states what to do specifically. Instead, we're a coalition of sorts. So we're a federation of state parties that share the same values, are working toward the same goals. Maybe our state parties look a little bit different, and they might follow a little bit different rules. They might have different tactics or different focuses or whatever, depending on the challenges they face. Chris was talking about how different ballot access is in different states. And so because of challenges like that, state parties might need to be set up differently. And that's okay. But the point is that the National Party is this federation of state parties. We encourage communities to do what makes the most sense in their community, in line with our key values and our broader, objectives and agreements that we do get together as a national party and discuss and agree on. In addition to state parties, we've also formed a number of identity caucuses to make sure that groups that are historically marginalized in U.S. politics, have more of a say within the Green Party. That we can make sure that those voices and views are being heard more. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. Next slide, please. Still don't think I can do it. Yeah, there we go. Thanks. So here's kind of a diagram of the overall National Green Party structure. So kind of in the middle of the screen, you see delegates from state parties plus delegates from identity caucuses. So each of our state parties that's accredited plus our nationwide identity caucuses that are accredited will elect delegates to get together and talk in what we call our national committee, which is the biggest decision-making body of the National Green Party of the United States. And again, it's not there to have top-down decisions on everything necessarily, but it's there so that ideally we can be helping each other and we can be discussing challenges that we face, and we can be sharing ideas on how to overcome those challenges. We can share solidarity, we can share resources with each other, share ideas, and do nationwide things like endorsing a political platform, right? Saying that, Greens nationwide support a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, National Health Service, all these things. So we get together to make decisions like this and talk about things. And we do that through delegates that meet together in the National Committee that mostly do their work online, but we have a once-a-year annual national meeting where, in theory, they get together and talk too. It's been difficult with COVID, but that sort of thing. So you can kind of think of it as the Congress of the Green Party is what the National Committee is. So they kind of make the decisions for the National Party as a whole. The National Committee also elects a smaller group of 9 members. That's the steering committee, and so I'm a current co-chair on the steering committee. Chris was a previous one, and they're kind of instead of having like a president, we have a steering committee that makes those sort of executive decisions day to day, handling administrative stuff, making sure that the National Committee functions and staff are doing things and whatnot. And then finally, the National Committee will also elect delegates, because one great thing about the Green Party is that there's Green Parties nationwide. Globally. Worldwide is the word I was thinking of. There's Green Parties around the world. There's over 100 of them, so in most countries around the world. And a lot of them, there's some variance in exactly what those Green Parties support, and we have some differences of opinion for sure with some of them, but there's a lot of leftist eco-socialist Green Parties that are out there too, and we recognize that to be a green socialist movement, we have to also be part of an international movement for the international working class. So it's really great to know that there's other Green Parties out there and that we can talk with them and interface with them. So we do things like elect delegates to go meet with counterparts from international parties. The Green Party of Japan, for example. My local Green Party in Pittsburgh, we actually one of our members went and visited Japan and met with Japanese Green Party, and they talked about the problems with the Fukushima nuclear disaster and things like that. And so that was an interesting point of solidarity where we could kind of put out our own statement about we're in solidarity with the Japanese Green Party, and so it's great to have this international movement on top. So that's basically the national structure, to give you an idea of how national decisions are made, such big things like setting a national platform and all. But a lot of decisions will actually be made at your local or state party in terms of which campaigns to run or which activist things to do and stuff like that. So I think our next slide will talk about that. We do have a national structure that you can fit into, but really the best place to start with the Green Party is to start with your local or state party. You can find that at gp.org/state_parties there. You can look and find the state party that's near you. There are a few states that don't have an accredited state party right now, though, so if you're in one of those states, you can contact the national party, and we can put you in touch with our accreditation committee and stuff like that to try to potentially form a new state party. But most states have a state party that you can get involved in. And then most state parties have a structure where the state party itself is kind of a federation of local parties, whether it be kind of regionally or by the county, like we do in Pennsylvania. We have a local Green Party for each county. So there might be a local party near you that you can join up with. And again, if there isn't a local party, you can talk to your state party and get guidance on how to start a local party, which is probably the best thing that you could do in your community to really build up your local party. And the state and national can give you some resources, for example, connecting you to green voters in your neighborhood. And you could just start doing things like knocking doors and introducing yourself to them and building up your local Green Party, one step at a time, starting in your neighborhood. We can connect you to Greens that are in your area. So there's also the National Identity Caucuses that I think I didn't mention, but there's a youth caucus. So if you're under 35, they're actually called the Young Eco-Socialists. So they're right in line with green socialism, right? So if you're under 35, check out the youth caucus, and you can join that. But there's also the Lavender Caucus, which supports LGBTQ. There's a women's caucus, a Latin caucus, and a National Black Caucus. So you can check those out on the website too. And then finally, of course, to get involved, you can join the Green Socialist Organizing Project itself, which is sponsoring this presentation, which is Green Party socialists from around the country getting together to help support each other and organize our local parties, so that we can build the green movement nationwide, because there's a lot of change that needs to happen. So here's more about the Green Socialist Organizing Project. So it has 4 main goals: political education on eco-socialism, independent politics, and current events and issues; party building, so providing support and guidance and help in organizing new independent green locals; elections campaigns, where we can provide support for helping green socialists run for office and to win those campaigns; and then finally, issues campaigns, so not necessarily running for office, but supporting direct actions, the activism and advocacy that we were talking about earlier, to advance our green socialist policy in kind of the public mindset and put pressure on the power structures that exist today. So we hope that we'll see you in the Green Socialist Organizing Project, as well as the broader Green Party. So that's about it. And if you have any questions, we'll take a few questions. We're a few minutes over time, but we did pretty good. Basically,
I've answered a few in the chat, but then we have a couple. We have a couple related ones from Andrew Hager. I'm with the Independent Party. Would it be possible to support the Green Party while purple, or would it be more beneficial to join the Green Party? Also, as an Independent Party member, is it possible to still show? Yeah, similar question, right? So I guess one question I have is, are you an independent, which would probably be better described as no party affiliation, or are you affiliated with a party that is called the Independent Party? If you're a member of an independent party that is an explicitly separate organization from the Green Party, unless you have really specific reason for staying with that independent party, and I can't think of any independent party, right? Capital P party that is very active, right? None on a national level. That my case for the Green Party would be that we're the only left party with serious ballot access around the country, right? So we're the only left-wing party, capital P party again, that is actively trying to build a nationwide movement, to elect people to office and to exert political power. The Republicans and Democrats are both variations of right-wing parties, and then the Libertarians as well are another right-wing party. So that's kind of the case for why to join the Green Party over another party. You just said you're more of a no party affiliation, which is more common. In my state, I'm required to be no party affiliation. So I've actually been called out on that, where someone said, "Show me your green registration," and I said, "I can't because there's not," and they didn't believe me, right? Because in their state they could register. And then Michael Conway just actually gave Andrew the real answer that for me, and that is an independent. I guess the easiest way is probably to think about it as in terms of like an independent campaign, right? So when there's an independent running for office, they're running for themselves, right? And that's it. Not that they're not running for their community, but what they, at the end of the day, when they get on the ballot, they get on the ballot. If they achieve, a result that is over the threshold to get recognition, they get recognition, right? But it stops and it ends with them. There is no party organization, and the importance of a party is that it builds that long-term, place where power, where systems, where resources, where relationships can be built, as opposed to scattered independents that are, not interconnected and not lifting each other up. A party allows to help the people around you and not just the sole people within that race, right? Within that electoral district or whatever, however you're organizing and identifying. So what we get out of being a part of a party is, that long-term thought, that the ability to participate in the crafting of a collective vision and a collective platform and collective policy and strategy, right? When an independent candidate runs, in my experience, actually independent candidates are pretty open to hearing other ideas and things like that, right? But like outside of going to a town hall meeting or having a meeting with that candidate or their staff and changing individual minds on something, right? There's not really a way to move things. You get what you get when you have an independent candidate. Whereas when you're part of a party, especially a grassroots party, right? Not the memberless parties of the Democrats and the Republicans, where grassroots folks don't actually have, where voters don't have any power. But within a grassroots party, you can show up at a meeting, you can put proposals on the table, right? And you can actually move the direction and the trajectory of the party in the long term. So that's what you get, party versus independent. To play the other side of the coin, right? Even though it's not really in my interest as a green, you don't have the stigma, right? Independents off in states. So Lisa Savage ran for U.S. Senate in Maine in 2020 and she was a green candidate. But when she was on the ballot, she was an independent, and that's because independents had to collect far less signatures than Greens. They made it easier to get on the ballot as an independent than they did as a third party. And the reason they did that is because they don't want you forming a party that has long-term potential to build power. They want any kind of outside push, right? They want Bernie it's why when Bernie got elected to the House, right, 30 plus years ago, we can't forget that he's a institutional figure in Washington, right? He's been there for decades. But one of the first things that happened when Bernie was elected to the House was the Democrats came to him and said, "You can caucus with us, right? We'll put you on committees as a Democrat, or not as a Democrat, but we'll put you on committees like we do our members, and you'll vote with us. And in exchange, we won't challenge you if you're running as an independent," right? The Vermont Independent Party, which was a capital P independent party, got thrown under the bus, right? And Bernie became a lowercase I independent with no party attached to him, and therefore not a serious threat to the Democratic Party, right? By isolating him there, they were able to make it so that he's just a nuisance, right? He's a dog with a lot of bark, but when it comes down to voting, he almost always toes the line. Right, so they were able to neutralize what could have been a really revolutionary person from shifting things too hard, right? Skeleton Films kind of asked tangentially, what do we think of Eugene Debs? We love Eugene Debs. As a socialist, he was relatively conservative, by modern standards, but he also was, we're talking 100 years ago. But Eugene Debs' quote about rather voting for what he wants and not getting it than voting for what he doesn't get, than voting for what he doesn't want and getting it is exactly why why we run third parties, right? When how we use the term "lost in the sauce" in 2020, right? He said when you vote for Joe Biden because you're scared of Trump, he doesn't know that you support he doesn't know you support Medicare for all. He doesn't know you support a Green New Deal. He doesn't know you support defunding the police because you voted for someone that doesn't support those things, right? A vote is generally received, despite how Democrats like to spin, a third-party vote as a vote for Republicans, which is just absolute ridiculous nonsense propaganda and literal voter suppression, right? A vote is generally received by the people running as they support me and what I put on the table, right? So when you voted for Joe Biden, you voted to veto Medicare for all, right? You voted for opening up more fossil fuel infrastructure. You voted to continue, his role from when he was the vice deporter in chief, right, under Obama, and to continue Trump's immigration policies because that's what he's talked about, right? Those are the policies he was on. You voted for shoot them in the legs, not defund the police, right? When you voted for Joe Biden, those were the things you voted for. And a big problem we have in this country, I like to frame it as we have a negative voting culture in this country where most people vote against Republican or Democrat, right? The Democrats are voting against Trump and the Republicans are voting against this idea they have that Biden's a communist who's coming for their guns, even though there's no evidence, right? So we vote against things instead of for them. And when you vote against things, like Eugene's Deb said, right, I'd rather vote for something and not get it than against something and get it. When you voted for Joe Biden, you voted to not get Medicare for all, right? That was the vote you cast. And saying, well, I voted for Joe Biden because of all, he doesn't hear any of those reasons, right? They're lost in the sauce. The Democratic, Party doesn't hear it. They just say, look at that. All these millions of people voted for us, so we can continue right on our path, and we can continue ignoring what they, what policy positions our voters support. So
that actually goes back to Eugene Debs' experience to kind of bring it back full circle. That he was originally a Democrat. He originally was an elected Democrat, I think a mayor, right? And the party machine suppressed him and suppressed the movement, suppressed workers, fought strikes and all that stuff. He saw all of this firsthand about how the party was anti-worker and just against all of the things that the working class needs. And so, he had to split. He said, there needed to be an independent movement for socialism. And he led the Socialist Party for years, was the presidential candidate.
He was a senator.
Senator, yeah, okay. It was a little bit higher than I thought. I thought it was more local office, but but yeah, the point is he saw the party suppression firsthand and knew he wasn't going to get anywhere with that. So, turned to the Socialist Party. It was the presidential candidate for years, and his main organizing strategy was, as he ran for president, he went from city to city organizing the workers, telling them that they had to form unions and fight back against capitalism, and that included fighting back against the Republicans and the Democrats, because they go hand in hand with capitalism. It's all part of the same system. I absolutely think that is the right attitude to have for the Green Party moving into the future, both with our activism, supporting workers and supporting our candidates.
Yeah, and especially when, we're talking about like the non-hot button issues, right? I'm not someone who says the Republicans and Democrats are the same. Because they're not, right? We have a neoliberal party and a fascist, proto-fascist party, right? There are differences, and they are important, right? Things like reproductive rights and LGBTQ rights, a lot of social issues. There are important differences, but when it comes down to the economy, when it comes down to imperialism, right? When it comes down to maintaining capitalism and the systems of oppression that tie into it. the Republicans and the Democrats are on the same page, right? So if we want to change things in those areas, we have to have something different, right? I find it amusing is the wrong word. Enraging is probably a better word, right? That, in 2022, I saw Greens attacked for being anti-choice because they were running against the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party had 50 years to codify Roe, and they had multiple opportunities where they had the power to do it, and they didn't, right? The Democratic Party in 2016 ran an anti-choice vice presidential candidate in Tim Kaine, right? Bernie Sanders himself goes out and stumps for anti-choice Democrats, right? But when you ask what the Green Party's position on reproductive rights is, it's full access, fully funded under Medicare for All and a national health service. Not only do we support full access to reproductive rights, we don't think it should cost you a dime because it should be included in basic health care. And that basic health care should be part of a national health service that's publicly owned and controlled and not ran by pharmaceutical companies and, for-profit providers, right? So somehow just existing in opposition to the Democratic Party, who's never taken reproductive rights seriously, right? They've never taken it seriously. If they did, the Roe would have been safe and legislatively protected. It gets twisted by their propaganda machine into painting the most pro-reproductive rights platform, from a major party. And even other smaller leftist parties don't have a cohesive enough platform in most cases to compete with the Green Party platform on this issue. But somehow we're now anti-choice because we're opposing the anti-choice Democrats, right? The Democratic Party doesn't have a consensus on abortion rights. They don't. They are filled with anti-choice. My state senator, or my state representative, where I live in Central Illinois, anti-abortion, voted against medical marijuana, voted against legal marijuana, voted against civil unions, voted against gay marriage, voted in favor of gay conversion therapy. And this is a Democrat, right? But if I were to run against her, I would be positioned as opposed to all of those things, despite the fact because the party likes to put this veneer of, we're for equality and we're for all these rights. The Democratic Party stands for these things, but the Democratic Party only stands for them when it comes to fundraising, right? And so if we want real change, we have to demand real change, right? We absolutely have to start, demanding the real change. If we keep asking for less than what we want, we're never going to get what we want. So it's really, really important. And Eugene Debs was, and you say right here, democracy is on the ballot. We want to talk about who's kicking people off the ballot because it's the Democrats in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Montana, right? In 2020, the Democrats threw people off the ballot. In North Carolina, right, in 2020, they went door to door trying to get a Green U.S. Senate candidate kicked off the ballot, asking people who'd signed his petitions to revoke it. And then when they didn't revoke it, they sued. And they lost in court, and we got to be on the ballot, right? Democracy's on the ballot, but we don't have a democracy, and the Democrats don't want a democracy. We have an oligarchy, and that serves exactly what the Democratic Party wants, right? Party suppression is voter suppression, and the Republicans are fucking horrible. Right? They're racist. What Republicans do is they kick people off the ballot. What Democrats do is they kick parties off the ballot. Neither one's interested in democracy, right? Earlier when we were talking about ballot access, we were talking about, during COVID in New York, the Democrats tripled the requirement of what it took for a third party to get on the ballot by attaching it to a COVID relief bill. And they took that number to 45,000 signatures in 42 days. That's worse than Russia or any other country to get on the ballot. That's not democracy. We don't have it, and Democrats did it, right? I live in Illinois. 25,000 signatures in 90 days to get on for president or a statewide office. That's the Republicans and Democrats collect 3,000. That's not democracy, and the Democrats are who put it in place. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that in Pennsylvania too, where in 2020, Howie Hawkins, our presidential candidate, was kept off the ballot in Pennsylvania because one of the forms was faxed in.
Which they were told they could do.
During COVID, when the office was closed and the governor put an emergency order saying all the paperwork had to be electronic, the Supreme Court went and dug through, found in like the election law of 1880 or something that it had to be paper or whatever. And so they're like, well, it was faxed in, so it doesn't count. And the governor's law doesn't actually affect anything with elections. It affects everything else, but not elections. And so that was how they prevented democracy in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, the courts actually, there literally was both a Republican and a Democrat who filed in court together. I think they were running for city council or something in Erie, maybe. I forget which city. But the local court actually agreed with them and said, oh, you don't have to collect any signatures or anything. It's a pandemic. We understand. You need to be on the ballot. Give choice to voters. So, you could see how the system tries to suppress us. And so we have to be prepared for it by, out-organizing it. And we can always overcome these challenges by organizing with more people. That's always the trick that we have to keep in mind.
I saw leftists from Louisiana. It was a similar thing. Right, we weren't on the ballot in Louisiana in 2020, and the reason was because they didn't have the offices open to turn in the paperwork. Right, they closed the offices for COVID, but they didn't provide accommodation for COVID. Right, and so
I
absolutely on the ballot, but the problem is the Democrats aren't trying to protect democracy. If they would have passed HR 1 when they had control of the House and the Senate, right? And they would have passed HR 1 with putting the little poison pills they put into it, right?
Yeah.
When they had HR 1, the things they weren't telling you were things like they increased the amount that a person could give to a political party from 10,000 to 100 million. That's the complete undermining of any kind of public finance reform, right? Where we're trying to get money out of politics. They massively increased the amount of money in politics in their bill that was supposed to be about democracy, right? So I think it is really important that we remember we don't have a democracy, right? Our founders never intended it for it to be, and we don't have one today. So again, if we want something, right? If we want to have a viable multi-party democracy, the Green Party is the only left solution out there that's talking about this, right? And they're the only left party that's putting these kind of proposals on the table on the national level, right? So it's all the way back to that Debs thing, right? If we want these things, we have to vote for them. This fear-based voting, this negative voting that we're doing is just leading us deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole. And we're very, very close on so many options, so many areas like, the climate and the healthcare and inequality and nuclear war, where we can't keep going deeper, right? We've been told to the point that, it's now, it's very nearly a grave. So we've got to stop this kind of stuff. Yeah. So let's see.
I think just to add in real fast, my state representative, I wanted to throw in just like you experienced, Chris. My state representative is a Democratic woman who's anti-abortion, who is anti-cannabis, who is pro-policing and pro hard crackdown on everything. And when I tried to reach out to local Democrats about it and say, there's an anti-abortionist in your group, would you spread that word? Not only did they not do it, but all of the so-called progressive candidates in the area actually promoted her on social media and recommended her and said, hey, I endorse this person. She's a great representative for this area. I really love working with her, and just, that's what I experienced in Pennsylvania. And New York is going through it now too, where the new New York governor, after Democrats ran on this nationwide strategy of protect abortion, right? The person she nominates for the state Supreme Court is an anti-abortion Republican. This is the Democratic governor of New York recommending that. So, they flat out lie to our faces is really what happens. And they lie to our faces about their policy and then tell us it's our fault for demanding something different, for trying to organize a party and trying to run candidates and trying to participate in democracy. So we have to organize against that, and the way that we organize against it is through creating not just the Green Party as a political party that runs candidates, but just like we said before, building an activist movement, and connecting that with workers' unions and all of these different community organizations that can really build different power to put pressure on the system and actually make the changes that we need, which has happened before in history. We could do it again, but we have to organize independently and have this broader movement backed by candidates and unions and things like that in order to make it happen.
Yeah, one thing I've learned in my decade of green organizing is that most Democrats don't have a strategic difference with us. They don't want us to exist, right? And they won't say it explicitly. It'll always be couched in this or that, but the reality is, and it shows, words ain't shit. And when we look at the actions of the Democratic Party, what we see is that they don't want the existence of third parties at all. They don't want anyone to be able to run to the left of them because they think that they own everyone to the left of the Democrats. They aren't interested in democracy. They're interested in power. Let's see. Aaron Revelis had said, how can we begin the integration of Socialist into the Green Party to start working towards a broader left party? I'll start off by saying Socialists have been here the whole time. And not just a few. Like, one of the major factions of the Green Party has always been Socialist, right? Going back all the way to Howie and that first meeting, right? There were always Socialists in the room. And not to be disparaging to my liberal organizer friends, but in my experience, it's the Socialists who do the work, right? And that plays out in the Green Party, right? When I look at some of the best work that's coming out of the Green Party, it's on the the backs of Socialists. It's not on the backs of loud liberals that condemn us for existing. It's on the back of the Socialists of the party. So we've always been here. But to get more into the crux of Aaron's question, we need to learn how to engage in like radical solidarity, right? If we took every single left formation in the entire country, we'd still be irrelevant politically, right? If we took every single leftist that ran for president in any given year, even in a great year like 2016 with Jill, who isn't a socialist, right? Jill's like a New Deal liberal more in her politics. But even when we take that, a great result like she had in 2016, we'd still be less than 2%, right? So none of us has figured this out, right? None of us have the weight to achieve, victory or revolution or whatever we're trying to achieve, right? We're still in growing phases. So we need to get involved in radical solidarity where we support each other, right? And I hear a lot of people talk about like left unity, and I don't even think we're there yet where we need to talk about unity. Where unity, because I see left unity as more of like let's form a Syriza, right? Or a left coalition that is one unit within the United States. And as I said, if we did that, we would still be irrelevant, right? So I think that right now we need to embrace multiplicity of tactics, right? We need to let Peace and Freedom do the great work that it does in California, right? We need to let the Vermont Independent Party do the great work that it does in Vermont. We need to let the Green, and where I think the Greens can fit into this picture is on the national level and on the state and local level, depending on your area, offering up an electoral route for people to run, right? We should be encouraging our members to be dual members. Like Howie for years was an ISO member. He's a founder of the Greens, ISO, Socialist Party since the 60s. Right, dues paying IWW, dues paying member to all these different leftist organizations, so that he can support them, and so that he can be, kind of a conduit for collaboration. And in my local area, right, I've had Socialist Alternative popped up and has disappeared, but I was involved with them when they were here. The Socialist Party popped up and disappeared, and I was involved with that. I always dual membered with these leftist organizations. Right now, I'm the leftist org in my town that I primarily work with is the Panther Solidarity Network, right, or the Panther Solidarity Organization, PSO. right? So when we interact with each other, especially at the local level, like we need to come together as comrades, right? We need to be like, you're doing this, that's awesome. We'll support you. We'll tell our people about it. You're doing this, that's awesome. And when it comes time to, have an election and run somebody, who we got, and let's put our weight behind somebody as a collective. Let's offer solidarity and try to build each other up instead of trying to compete with each other for the little bit of scraps that are down here in our current capacity. So I think we've always been there, and I'm not saying entryism necessarily, but like we should become members in all these organizations. We should make sure we're collaborating and working as actively as we can with other socialists in our area, in our regions. Do you have anything on that?
I mostly just agree with what you said there. We ultimately have to build a broader kind of solidarity coalition, and that requires us going to each other's events. And one of the local organizers that I really respected here in Pittsburgh, he became involved in the Green Party over time, and I asked him one day, so what brought you to the Green Party? What was it about the Green Party that really made you want to be a member? And what he told me was, he said, well, whenever there was an anti-war action, or an action against police brutality, or action against fracking or something like that, I always saw the Green Party there. I always saw Green Party members there supporting those events, and those events were events that I was going to as part of other organizations. And so I figured, if Greens were always going to be here supporting me, I should start going to Green events. I should start supporting you. And that was what brought him into the Green Party. And that's the way to build trust and cooperation and solidarity with each other, that we show up to each other's events and we ask, how can we help each other? So when you talk about integration, that's the perspective that I think about. How can we show solidarity and help each other and actually be there and show up for each other and build that trust? That's what builds the network that enables us to run candidates for office that can win, and to run activist campaigns that could really get the message out to the public and win the change in how the public views that issue. So that's where I would suggest starting. Just kind of start looking for events in your area and showing up, and don't necessarily be too pushy, not necessarily entryism, as Chris was saying, but introduce yourself and say you're with the Green Party and you're here because you want to help and you want to support.
Jenna Colby asked, what's entryism? Entryism is the idea that members of one organization join another organization in mass in order to take it over, right? So it's like a hostile takeover is the strategy, as opposed to collaboration, which is kind of what we're advocating for. Leftist of Louisiana asked, do we think the CPUSA should work heavily with the Green Party? They're not in CPUSA. They're just wondering. CPUSA needs to get its foot out of the Democratic Party first, right? CPUSA has spent decades endorsing Democrats rather than engaging in independent politics. So that, I think that's the first step for CPUSA in terms of being part of this radical solidarity of the left.
That's true of a lot of organizations like DSA and all that. For example, depending on which local chapters you're talking about, many local Green parties have good relations with their local DSA chapter because they do good work on the ground. They do good organizing. They run food pantries or whatever it is. But what hinders the ability to really cooperate is the fact that the national DSA pushes so much into the Democratic Party. It takes their dues. DSA members pay dues, and it takes the vast majority of their dues to dump it in national, where they hand it over to the Democratic Party. If all of those dues were going to the Green Party or our broader coalition on the left that was independent, we would be in a much different situation. So I think, from the Green Party perspective, I would like to work with many different organizations, because there's many organizations that are doing great work on the ground, but they're being hindered by the national party or the national organizations that are specifically there to co-opt and to pull people into the Democratic Party. And so, that's something to watch for these organizations. And I would ask people who are members of those organizations, on the inside, to look for that and to ask why why can't that organization be more independent, and that if we want to work together with the Green Party or other organizations, we have to be able to break those ties with the Democrats in order to be able to really effectively collaborate.
And that all ties back, I think, when we're thinking about that, we need to start bottom up, right? And that's how we need to be building these relationships. Like we taught, I heavily talked about in the green strategy section earlier in the workshop, right? Bottom up first. And one of the reasons is, running a presidential campaign in 2020, there was zero chance that National DSA was going to endorse, the Green candidate, even after Bernie dropped out. Even when we had, meetings with their Libertarian Socialist caucus, even their explicitly bottom left socialists wouldn't endorse a bottom left presidential candidate if they were Green. But we saw some locals break ranks and endorse Howie, right? Garrett said they've got a good relationship in Pittsburgh with their local DSA. Where I live in a state capital, and our DSA is very conservative, right? They're very tied to the Democratic Party that runs my state. So I don't have that kind of relationship. I do have individual relationships, right? So if you're somewhere where you don't have that, where you have a more conservative DSA, start with the socialists are in it, because they are there, right? They generally do exist, and they kind of always have. But the problem is that they're toiling away in a capitalist party, right? In a front for a capitalist party. So that's a big part of it. We've got, and it's a big part of why we've got to start at the bottom, right? How do we build to the point that DSA endorses a socialist for president instead of, whether that's Green or whoever, right? Endorses a socialist for president instead of silently, condoning the right-wing Democrat like they did in 2020. We do that by changing their grassroots, right? By building those relationships, by showing them at the smaller local level that, endorsing we endorsed this Green and they won, and then they did the policies we wanted, right? So now they got some positive, feedback into the loop from endorsing us, and now maybe the local people that are on their state council are a little more open to the idea of endorsing us for governor, right? And then as we see successes there, now they're more open to U.S. House or Senate or president endorsements. And so we've got to, whether it be organizationally or whether it be in our communities, we've got to start these conversations at the bottom, right? We've got to start with people, because one-on-one we can have a conversation, we can come to an understanding. We can find ways that we can collaborate. But if we're talking organization to organization with their, built-in biases and allegiances and goals, it's much harder to make that breakthrough, right? It's got to start on that individual level. And I saw a question earlier. I'm not scrolling and finding it, but someone had asked about where to start in organizing. And we have, if you go to, let me find the banner. If you go to our 101 section, right, you can find whole workshops where we talk about this in our organizing workshops. But what I always tell people is start with your neighbor, right? Walk out your door and knock on the door of the person next to you. Have a conversation. Knock on the door on the other side. Start expanding. And it's not just one conversation. It's conversation over time that builds the trust and relationship. So that then when you say, we're rallying people out, at the Capitol for this event, they show up because you've shown up for them. When you say, I'm running for city council, they say, hell yeah, I'll vote for you. Give me a yard sign. And it's those relationships that we have to build on that individual level. And the same goes for our organizational relationships. We've really got to start on bottom up, because once you get to the national level of, a DSA or a working families party, we're talking about, often lifelong entrenched Democratic Party activists who have, hierarchical control. And that means it's very hard for us to actually, get there. So, I think we did kind of cover it. There was a question, do you all like communism? Yeah, we're socialists, right? We have different perspectives. Like I said earlier, I come from more of a bottom left anarcho-communist, background. Marx is heavily important to me, but so is Bakunin, right? To quote the two contemporaries who like to fight with each other, right? They both had great points. I am through and through a Marxist, but I'm a Marxist to the end. Where I see the end state that there is no end state in Marxism. It's a process, but I see it as working through to the stateless society. So yeah, and they've all, like I said earlier, we have Marxist Leninists that I am incredibly close to, and that have guided me in my growth through the party. And the same can be said for communalists and different branches of socialists. So we're very much a multi-tendency party, but we are explicitly an anti-capitalist party. That doesn't mean there aren't some folks who disagree with that, but they lost that vote like 80+% to less than 20, so they can shut up. One last quick one, because we did finish this in about an hour, but we've gone like 40 over on questions.
I appreciate the questions, though.
Yeah, no, the questions are honestly the most important part, so I don't mind going a little long. Andrew Hager says, do you believe vote shaming is as dangerous as voter suppression? Vote shaming is voter suppression. It's just voter suppression on the individual level instead of on the systematic and party level. The idea that vote shaming often kind of relies on throwing accusations of privilege, and vote shaming itself is susceptible to those same accusations, right? So yeah, vote shaming and is part of a larger anti-democratic culture that we have in this country. Wanted to know what states we were from. I'm from Illinois, downstate central Illinois, and Garrett's from Pennsylvania in the Pittsburgh area. So I'm scrolling to see. I'm skipping some things that kind of try to keep us on the Green Party. Right? This is a big topic that we can really explode outside of very easily. That said, we have this 101 series is recurring. We're going to be here this month. We're on the 5th Tuesday. We kind of bucked our trend, but we're going to go back to being on the 4th Tuesday of the month. Every month, same time, same place. You can look at greensocialist.net/101s to see about upcoming ones. This conversation kind of solidified for me that one of the ones we need to do in 2023 is independent politics. We need to spend an hour just on that. But so we dive, questions of organizing, our organizing ones, we go through theoretical models. We go through, in our workshops, we go through focused looks at how to build a Green Party, how to rebuild a Green Party. In our eco-socialism ones, we start off with very broad, and then one of them we spend a really long time on talking about what is capitalism, and then another one we spend a really long time talking about what is socialism, right? So we dive in on some of those older ones. So we're going to keep doing these, and we're working on some other resources as well, but we're going to be returning the fourth Tuesday of the month at 8 p.m. Eastern every month this year, to continue these kind of conversations. Garrett, you got anything to close?
Yeah. I'm looking forward to our upcoming stuff that we have. We're going to go monthly at least, the fourth Tuesdays, as Chris was saying. So definitely welcome folks to come back for that and, ask more questions. And if you have any comments on particular topics you'd like us to talk about, you can certainly contact, at greensocialist.net and let us know. And what I'd really like to do is expand more than just once a month so that we could try to get more, good discussion out there about, what it means to be a green socialist, both in theory and practice, right? Practice together. So appreciate any thoughts on that. I wanted to throw out there, I see the leftists of Louisiana asking about if there's a whole lot of Southern Greens and all. And I'm not sure how active it is, but I pretty sure the Green Party of Louisiana is still forming and active. They got attacked, as we were saying, in terms of ballot access last election, and unfortunately kept off the ballot. But you might be able to sync with the Green Party of Louisiana, and I guess there's a Green Party New Orleans chapter, and
Greens are active in Florida, Texas.
Yeah, there's Green parties in a few other states.
South Carolina, North Carolina are all active.
Yeah,
parties.
Yeah, South and North Carolina especially are very active. So there's definitely Greens in the South. Just like everywhere in the country, really, we just have to organize a lot more. I think one comment I guess I can make is that I think, unfortunately, one thing that we really have to learn is that the Bernie Sanders campaigns really sucked a lot of energy out of the independent left, not just the Green Party, but everything in the independent left. Bernie Sanders pulled everybody back into the Democratic Party, or Democratic Party adjacent organizations like TSA, which basically is a wing of the Democratic Party and was essentially formed to be so. It was originally formed to pull people out of the old Socialist Party into the Democratic Party, so it's still kind of in a way doing its job. So I think there's room to rebuild the Green Party and the Independent left all across the country, and to learn from the Bernie Sanders campaign that those policies are incredibly popular. So if we talk about it more and talk to our neighbors and get together more with Greens, we can really quickly, I think, grow the movement and the party. But it starts with all of us having conversations in our local communities. So. There's no shortcut. One of my books on union organizing is called No Shortcuts. And so there's no shortcut to becoming a major movement and a major party. It starts with us in our local communities. And I think the Green Party is one way that we can connect with other folks that share our ideas. And, the more of us that are in there, the bigger it'll get. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and, I think it's an important thing for people who are coming into contact with the Green Party right now to understand is that we are, to be upfront, in a rebuilding period. And Bernie's part of it, right? Bernie sucked a lot of energy out of the independent left, and that does include the Greens. Jenna Conley says that Colby says it kind of did more harm than good. It seems I would agree, right? What it did was put issues like Medicare for All back on the agenda. But it also created a very distorted vision of what socialism is, where it's distorted, capitalist social democracy into being, kind of positioned as socialism, which it is not. Those are kind of explicitly different ideas, and then it sucked, like we've said, it sucked people back into the it sucked people back into the sphere and the orbit of the Democratic Party, because as much as so many of the people who supported Bernie said they didn't support the Democratic Party, Bernie said from day one in both presidential rounds he did that he would step back and he would endorse. He said from day one he would endorse the Democratic Party nominee for president, admitting that it wasn't going to be him. Right? He was playing the role of the sheepdog, and just like Kucinich did before him and others have done before him, right? He was just the best one they've seen in a long time. So Bernie did some damage, right? Anyone but Trump was it continued in 2022 when there wasn't even Trump on the ballot, right? But we still faced anyone but Trump when in our races in 2022. It was worse than anyone but Bush. And every year for the Democrats is going to be an anyone but year because, like I said earlier, they fundamentally don't want us to exist. They don't want an independent left to exist. So it'll always be another year that they would support us because they never will actually support us. But Trump was worse, right? During the 2020 campaign, Nader told us that it was worse than 2004 after Bush. And Jill and Ajamu told us that it was worse than what they faced in 2016. And in 2016, the goal of the mainstream was, let's put these jokers on TV. Right. So all of a sudden, CNN and NPR and places that would never talk to Greens were giving Jill and Ajamu town halls, hoping that they would stumble on their faces. What they found out was that the ideas that the Green Party puts out there were extraordinarily popular, and it backfired on them. So we come into 2020, they learned their lesson that elevating us to hoping that we'll trip and fall wasn't going to work. So they instituted a blackout like we've never seen, right? It was absolute, like, absolutely
and not just
even Democracy Now! Refused to cover the Green Party, right? Most of the independent media, progressive media, which are mainly just talking heads serving their own purposes, right? But they were, even if they were criticizing the Democrats and Biden, they were very rarely advocating for an alternative, right? They were just they were engaging in negative politics and weren't actively pushing a proactive way. Right? We've been hurt by
Trump. Two-pronged thing, really.
And then we've been hurt, and then on top of that, COVID came, right? Yeah. And if you're the Republicans and the Democrats and you have literally billions of dollars at hand, you can weather COVID because you can continue your media-based strategy where you run ads and you don't actually talk to people and you just kind of put out a PR message. They were able to weather COVID just fine, blaming each other for millions dead, and it's both their faults, right? Biden just said he's going to end COVID, the COVID emergency in May. So, they were able to weather COVID fine, but as a grassroots organization, it devastated us. We couldn't meet, right? We could only meet via Zoom if we did. We couldn't knock doors in our neighborhoods. We couldn't be involved in movements like we were before, right? So we faced external pressures sucking our members away. We faced external pressures suppressing us. And then we faced COVID, really, really ruining our ability to actually engage in grassroots organizing. And if the Green Party can't engage in grassroots organizing, we're doomed, right? We are not trying to replicate what the Republicans and Democrats have in their memberless parties of voters who have no power. If we're going to be a grassroots party, we've got to be able to be active in our communities, and it just wasn't possible for a while. So the Green Parties faced this really bad perfect storm that we're trying to recover in. And unfortunately, the lay of the land got worse during the storm, right? The terrain got worse in many places. So, when you come into your contact with your local Green Party or state Green Party, keep in mind that we're battered and we're rebuilding. We really do need your help to, not just as a voter, right? A voter is great, but what we need are organizers. We need green organizers by the thousands so that we can elect green officials by the hundreds, and build from there.
Yep, exactly.
So, yeah, with that, I will say, come back next month for our next 101. We'll be doing another Green Party 101 later in the year, but we're going to kind of shift away from that repetitive cycle we did in 2022 where we went Green Party, eco-socialism, organizing. We're going to have these 101s have a little more diversity in their topics. If you want to get involved in our work, right? If you want to get involved in the Green Socialist Organizing Project, you can go to greensocialist.net and sign up. We have monthly membership meetings where you can come and you can, talk about what's going on, get involved in different working groups. Like we said, one of the reasons to become involved in organizations is that you get to move them, right? You get to have a voice. So come and help us do that. If you're specifically interested in, this kind of education work that Garrett and I are doing, you can email me directly, chris@howiehawkins.us. If you go to greensocialist.net and fill out the, sign up page, you'll get questions about what working groups you're interested in and all that. That'll get to me too. But if you just want to skip that whole, thing and go straight to the source and talk to the people doing the work, you can email me right there. And we will see everybody in a month for our next 101. As Garrett said, we do these monthly 101s, but we really hope we're going to be able to expand them. Next month on February 23rd at 8 p.m., which is a Thursday, we're going to have a panel discussion called Green Perspectives on the Ukraine War. It's going to feature Howie Hawkins, Matt Ho, and Margaret Kimberly. And they're going to talk about varying perspectives on, what the Green Socialist position should be on the conflict in Ukraine. So that should be a really good discussion. I'm excited to see it happen. it took months to get the schedules worked out. I've literally been trying this since probably close to 4 months to get it organized. So we've got that coming up on February 23rd. We will be back with a 101 on February 28th, the last day of the month, next month too. And then we're working on all kinds of stuff, kind of behind the scenes. And so some of those may come out as workshops. Some of those may come out as like little instructive videos and things like that on our social media. But yeah, we are churning away in the education working group at the Green Socialist Organizing Project. So, and we'd love to have you with us. So with that, thank you everybody for taking time to talk with Garrett and I tonight. And we said we were going to do it an hour, and we did 2. It's better than 3.
It was our presentation, our questions. It was better than before.
we did knock that presentation out in an hour, which was the goal. So again, thank you so much, everybody, for the great conversation.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
We'll see you for further conversations later.